Well, I mean, it really is quite simple, isn't it? This one's obviously better for all these reasons. The age-old debate, what is better, the long action or the short action? It's almost as vitriolic as a debate as what is the better cartridge. Let's explore that today. Thank you for joining me again in the shop. I know it's been a while, been a little busy, took up some new hobbies recently. We'll discuss that later. But they've been taking a lot of my time and spending some time with family and stuff like that. So we're back in action, back in the shop, ready to start rolling out some more springtime content as we get back out on the range. Thank y'all for joining me again. All right, in the gun world, there's two main action types in bolt action rifles that kind of carry the day when it comes to the conversation and the use and general purposes for most people in most shooting scenarios when it comes to bolt actions. You have your short action and your long action, or what is known as the standard length action. So it's not actually a true long action, it's the standard length action. But in context of the shooting world, those two action lengths are the most common and the most used by the most people in the most circumstances. So I'm going to talk about today the kind of the pros and cons of the short action versus the long action. Short action versus long action. So we're going to get into the differences of those two, talk about lengths and specs and those kind of things a little bit too, and some of the considerations you might want to put into it before deciding for yourself what you want to use, short action or long action. Now let's break down the biggest argument I hear the most, and the one that is kind of the most upfront and confronted argument, selling one action versus the other, and that is the length of pull. Basically, how long of a bolt do you have and how far back does that bolt have to travel, and how much action length do you have to travel to cycle that bolt. Okay, this is a long action, and this is probably the hottest contested portion of the entire debate, is how long is the bolt throw on these things, and why the short action is better than the long action in a lot of ways, or is the argument that is made is that the short action is actually better than the long action for most people. And it really is just how long is this bolt and how far back do you have to pull it to cycle a new round. This being a long action and this being the short action. You can see there is an obvious difference. Let's go ahead and break this down to measurements though. Real quick, measurements on a short action versus long action. And I'm just gonna measure the actual action length, not internals from the breech and stuff like that. Your standard short action, and both of these are based off of the Remington 700, which is kind of the platform standard across the board in the industry for actions, etc., accessories, all the good things. The standard short action, we're looking at 5.5 inches basically. So the body of the action itself. So let's look at this here from the edge of the recess here for the bolt, okay, right there to the front of the spacer here for putting or where you put the barrel. That is 5.5 inches long to that bolt handle breech right there. Okay, so the overall action length of a standard short action is about 7 7/8, and that includes the tang right here. So you have a portion here where the tang is, all that good stuff. So you're looking at about 7 7/8 inch long for the action itself, and that is just what houses the bolt, what houses the trigger, the main portion of the action minus the barrel. All right, let's break this down for the standard long action. This is a Bugar B14 long action. So from the recess for the bolt, right there, recess for the bolt to the front of the face there, you're looking at 6.5 inches versus the 5.5, and the overall length all the way to the tang, the end of the tang, of 8 7/8. So there's about an inch difference in the action length. That's about it. Okay, that 1 inch might actually make a difference for some people when it comes to the ease and comfort of grabbing your bolt and chambering a new round, throwing the bolt, so to speak. But for most people, I don't think that 1 inch is actually gonna make as big a difference as you might think. And that's purely from the mechanical standpoint of just cycling a bolt. The bolt throw and the comfort of that, and how efficiently and effectively you can throw that bolt and how quickly you can get it done, really has more to do with your length of pull, so the distance from here, your buttstock, to your trigger, than it does actually the actual length of the action. So for somebody like me, I have kind of short arms. I'm about a 12.5 inch length of pull. It doesn't matter if it's short action or long action. If this length of pull is, say, over an inch more than what I need, I have a hard time throwing the bolt regardless if it's a short action or long action. So that little extra 1 inch of pull of having to go forward and backward is not what actually makes the biggest difference when it comes to running an action, short action versus long action. That may be different for you. Some people may find it different, may find it actually is a lot easier to run and throw the bolt on a short action than it is a long action. Now there is a mechanical advantage to it. You are actually having to travel less distance with the short action to cycle a new round, and it is going to be, in some instances, and maybe a lot of instances for some people, quicker. Just because of the sheer mechanics of 1 inch less of travel. It makes a difference. I won't say it's a huge difference, and I won't say it's a deal killer that most people can't work around or learn how to work within the limitations of their action, or the longer action, say if that's what they have as a long action and that's all they have. Most people can learn how to manipulate or fire that bolt quicker, or as quickly as they would a short action, but there is going to be a slight mechanical difference to the short action when it comes to just smaller bolt throws. The overall package, yes, on a short action is going to be smaller. No question about it. The overall package on the short action, you lose an inch of real estate necessary for all the components and parts of a rifle. So you do lose about an inch of overall length when it comes to comparable barrel lengths and stuff like that, comparable stock sizes, all those good things. The trend nowadays is towards more short and handy rifles that are like shorter barrels, shorter bolt throws, and shorter actions. A lot of people are actually running shorter length of pulls, and couple that with a shorter action by an inch, which is an amount. It is not an insignificant amount. It is an amount of distance difference than the long action. And a shorter barrel, say like a 20 inch, you've got yourself overall a pretty lightweight and shorter, easier and more compact and kind of handier package overall. So there's an argument to be made too for shorter actions being lighter, which they are. Less material, less metal is lighter than more material, more metal. There's a rigidity claim too to shorter actions, also a valid thing when it comes to just the physics of metals and cylinders and the whole 9 yards. We could break it down into a physics lesson, but I'm not going to. Shorter and more compact means more compacted materials, not in grain size or anything goofy like that, but just you have less open space, say in the breech here. See how long the breech is on the long action versus the breech here on the short action. We're looking at a difference of, so you got about a 2 3/8 inch breech opening in a short action versus 3 1/4, so almost a full inch different in the breech itself opening. And so you have material that's closer together. There's less relief of material there, so it's going to be more rigid overall. It's just a physics thing. It's just metal. If you cut a smaller hole in metal, it's going to be more rigid than if you cut a big hole in a metal tube. That's as simple as it gets. Parts availability and components, I will say by far the short actions dominate the market when it comes to sheer availability of parts, components, aftermarket, and interchangeability overall for stocks, triggers, bolts, the whole 9 yards. It's way easier to find Remington 700 pattern short action components than it is to get your hands on or source Remington 700 long action components. I won't say it's difficult to get the long action components. I would just say there is more, and they are more readily available for the 700 short action style rifles. And even most manufacturers out there that are making actions, that are making guns and stuff like that, are making components, they almost always have in their catalog and are almost always mirroring in some way the Remington 700 short action pattern. It's kind of a standard. So that brings me to the last point. I really want to bring up this, like the overarching point of all of it though, is cartridge availability. What can you do in a short action versus a long action, and vice versa? When it comes to long action, that's where you shine with Magnum style cartridges, bigger calibers, fatter calibers, more robust calibers. You're going to see those kind of are necessary, or this long action is kind of necessary for those style cartridges. To really get big powder burns, big bullets going really fast, you got to have a long action. That's where they shine. That's what it's made for. That's what they fit in better. It's more the long-term standard. It's based off of like the 30-06 linked action, the standard action is. And so within that cartridge family, or that caliber range family, you have a lot of options, from your 300 Win mags, 7 PRCs, all the 7 mags, all that kind of stuff. That's where they shine. That's the home for the big cartridges, is the Remington 700 long action, or whoever's making it. The long action platform is the bread and butter, meat and taters home of large magnums, bigger bore, bigger diameter, and bigger kicking cartridges. I wouldn't say that's a very narrow field either. There's a broad range of Magnum style cartridges that can go in the Remington 700 long action style action, even the standard length long action, and then there's the Magnum length long action as well as that. So there's actually the action lengths that are longer than the standard length, and that's where your big stuff comes in, like really big monster cartridges that are just beef eaters. But by far, the action length that provides the broadest range of projectile use, cartridge use, is the short action. If you were to compare short action cartridges to the long action cartridges that are available out there today, I would say you'd probably find at least 20 to 30, maybe even 40% more short action cartridge offerings than there are to long action. It has just become, since I would say about the 1950s with the introduction of the 308 Winchester and stuff like that, I would say the short action has dominated the market when it comes to bolt action rifles. And the cartridges, the spin-offs, the Wildcats, the standardized cartridges now that promulgate that action length and are made and suited for that action length are boundless. There are tons and tons and tons and tons of them out there. So far as shootability goes too, I think that lends itself to the advantages of the short action, being that it is made for smaller cartridges. It is made for more shootable cartridges for the broader range of people. There's way more versatility in the cartridge selection for a short action. You can find everything from 22-ish style, cartridges like your 223 Wisdoms and short mag, because you can get Magnums and stuff like that for the short action. It's not that it's incapable of Magnum performance. It's just they're not as common as they are for the big boys. You got your Magnums and then you got your short actions. But in the short action platform, you do have a broad range of caliber selection out there. 300 Win short mag goes in the short action. Your little tiny squeaker cartridges like your 220 Swifts and stuff like that, short action cartridges. So basically, from field mice to moose, you can find a cartridge and a configuration in a short action that will work. So the intent of this video is just to keep it simple and break it down for people in kind of an uncomplicated way. Long action versus short action. What do you prefer when it comes to action length? Short action is going to be much more available, going to have much more caliber options, and it's going to be less fuss overall in finding components and stuff like that for them, because it's just everywhere. It's available all over the place. You can rebarrel this thing for just about any caliber you might ever need to hunt with for most game animals, I would say. Even if you were going after something like large game animals like moose and elk and stuff like that, you can use a short action for that. There are plenty of caliber options or cartridge options available for that. Some of them may be a little more niche or specialty than others, and some of your ranges may be limited as well, just given the powder capacity and supply of a short action versus a long action. And to illustrate that point, let me just pull two rounds, some of the most common rounds for short action versus long action these days. We have the 7 PRC, which is your long action. You have the 6.5 Creedmoor, which is your short action. You can note the difference there in the sizes, and that is really what contributes to the power difference in the actual cartridges themselves. It's like what is available size-wise that can fit in the long action, how much powder and bullet can you put in there, and power can you get off of that versus what you can get out of a short action. Now, that doesn't mean that the short actions are underpowered. Like I've said, you can get your 7 Wisdoms, your Wildcats, your 7 PRCWs, all those kind of things. You can get them to work just fine. 300 Wisdom, it's a great cartridge for the short action. It's basically a 30 caliber short Magnum. Okay, it's based off of the 300 Winchester Magnum concept. For the long action, it just fits in a short action, and you're getting very comparable ballistics and power downrange and distance, velocity, all those good things out of a shorter, fatter powder stack and a shorter, fatter action. So I think the debate gets a little bit in the weeds sometimes for some people. It really boils down to preference. What do you prefer? Would you like a short action cartridge? If you're going with a short action cartridge, if you're coming from that perspective, like I like the 308, I like the 6.5 Creedmoor, then there's no point in putting it in a long action like this. You're wasting real estate, you're wasting space, you're wasting weight where you don't need it, and you're wasting the mechanics of a longer throw, which you don't need. So there's going to be a lot of preference that goes in line with this, what people prefer and stuff like that. The debate is, I think, a silly one. Like, get the caliber that suits your needs and use the action that best suits that caliber. Go from there. If you want a big banging Magnum, you're going to need a long action. If you want pretty much everything else, short action. A lot of it's just personal opinion and stuff like that. If I had to pick just one to go with for life, like I could only have one action length for the rest of my life, I would probably go with the short action, just because of the versatility of it. Overall versatility of cartridge and caliber options and configuration options and stuff like that, the serviceability of it long term with components, and you know, it's going to be much easier to find a short action in somebody's safe or in a cache somewhere than it is going to be find a long action and the things you may need to service that. While the Magnum cartridges have their advantages, like they're something like a 7 PRC, you can take this cartridge right here and you can hunt anything, anywhere in the world with it, no question, and pretty successfully probably take that game at any reasonable distance. There is no question about that. So there's a major power factor advantage to the long action versus the short action. However, that doesn't mean you can't find cartridges in calibers capable of the same type of hunting capability and range and all those good things and power factor capability in a short action. It just is not as common. The more common short action cartridges are not the Magnum cartridges. So if you look at the shelves at the gun store and stuff like that, and you're looking through the short actions, you're going to find more commonly than anything 308, 7mm 08, 6.5 Creedmoor, 6mm Creedmoor, 243 Winchesters. You may find some 300 Win short mags. That's a pretty common caliber these days, pretty popular. So you might find some of that on the shelf. Definitely gonna find the 6.5 PRC. That is becoming really popular, really powerful, really quickly. And that cartridge alone is capable of taking most game in North America up to and including elk and all those good things. You just have to remember distances vary when it comes to short action, even Magnum cartridges versus long action big boy cartridges. So that's the debate, that's the topic for the day. Thank you for joining me again in this discussion. Let me know what you think about long action versus short action, and I hope we dispelled a little bit of the mythology around it, and it's really just a simple mechanical difference and a capacity difference in the two platforms, long action versus short action. All right, so remember to keep your powder dry, keep your knife sharp, and y'all stay safe out there and be blessed.